Well, for a closer look at U.S.-India economic ties, let's bring in Sourabh Gupta. Sourabh is the Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-America. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So what's your take on the significance of this visit and the timing as well?
I think it's a lot to do with pomp and pageantry. There's a real surprise as to the timing. You know, last month was India's Republic Day. Trump could easily have gone there. He was invited for that. He spurned it. Of course, also at that time, the impeachment hearings were on, so he might not have gone. So that was a deterrent. But the fact also of the matter is that there's significant developments happening with regard to the Afghan peace plan. And he might want to be in the region to actually have some connection with the Afghan peace plan, and India was a useful stopover, frankly, even though that's not how it's seen in India. But it's a little bit up as to exactly why the timing was now, frankly.
Now, we certainly did see a lot of love shown between the two leaders at this Namaste Trump event. Do the pleasantries reflect, though, the overall nature of the U.S.-India relationship?
Up to a point, I would say what it does reflect is the people-to-people ties in terms of U.S.-India relations, especially that which is reciprocated from the Indian side. In the United States, India is still a somewhat of an unknown quantity, but at least at the Indian side, Indian people love America, and therefore an American president is always going to get this sort of reception. And of course, at the strategic level, the U.S.-India partnership has gone from strength to strength over the last 10, 15 years.
And let's look at some of those strengths. Historically, what aspects of their economies have they cooperated the most on?
Economic cooperation has been dribble-drabble. It's really not been dense economic cooperation like we have between U.S. and China or U.S. and the Asia-Pacific, tied, interlocked with supply chains. The supply chains just simply do not exist in India. There's been all sorts of little produce and products which have been sold to the U.S., and you have U.S., the big brand U.S. companies are all in India. But as you discussed in the precursor, in that footage, energy really is becoming a big part because, of course, U.S. natural gas, India needs energy, and there's an absolutely good fit for the two nations out there.
And what do you see as some of the trickier aspects of the economic ties?
Oh, there are immensely tricky aspects, and the tricky aspects, I think, for the Indian side is to read up a little bit on the Phase 1 agreement that the U.S. had with China, because many of those issues, and those issues, of course, relate to tariffs, but it goes beyond tariffs in terms of agricultural, biotechnology, and SPS, and sanitary and photosanitary standards, and non-tariff barriers, etc., as well as access in the services areas like financial services and in terms of data flows. These are strong demands the U.S. has made of China. It has won many of those demands. It has won, as of now, none of those demands with India, and those demands are going to come supersized fairly quickly, I would say, in the next administration if Trump wins.
And we certainly know that with India being the 7th biggest economy, we have American dairy farmers, distillers, drug makers, others eager to get more access to those markets. Now, Trump did hint that he was working on a, quote, very big deal with India, potentially before November's election. Any idea of what that might entail?
He actually said on something on the lines is, right now we are doing a small deal, but I want to do a big deal. That deal might actually have to wait after I get re-elected. And he followed that up with, India has treated us very badly, but I have a very good relationship with Narendra Modi, who's a tough negotiator. He said all these things about China, and beware, I think the Indians should beware what's coming to them if Trump does get re-elected. It's not going to be a starter deal the U.S. is looking for. It's going to be a Section 301 investigation followed by real market access in India, which India will be uncomfortable with.
And certainly something they might have to not look forward to, but obviously the U.S. had a $23.2 billion goods trade deficit with India. We know that the trade deficit has been one of those sticking points that President Trump tends to sort of use as a jumping point for tariffs, and then what eventually became a trade war, as we saw with China. Do you see the likelihood of that happening then to India if Trump does get re-elected?
Oh, I absolutely see that likelihood happening, and particularly if Lighthizer is kept in the job, because he has been disappointed by the way India has dealt with trade issues. Indians, for their part, are trying to take care of the trade deficit by really ratcheting up the natural gas purchases so that that could at least cut down on the deficit. We've seen the deficit flagged often also in the U.S. currency reports that the Treasury puts out, even though India is not on the monitoring risk list because its exchange rate practices are good. But absolutely the deficit will become an issue front and center if Trump gets reelected, and I would foresee some very, very strong demands in this regard.
And just very quickly, how do you see closer India-US ties affecting the relationship with China?
Up to a point, the Indians want the U.S. defense and U.S.-India strategies to succeed because it does give them leverage with China, but up to a point, they also like to keep a little separation because they want to maintain their autonomy in managing these relationships. That's the way it's been for a while. That's the way it will continue to remain for a while.
All right, always good to have you on. Sourabh Gupta there, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at the Institute for China-America Studies.